Introducing the Book of Enoch, a collection of ancient writings that were banned from the Bible. It tells the lost history of the Nephilim, said to be the cursed offspring between humans and the sons of God. Perhaps you've heard of Enoch before, but what does it really say? And why is it so often misunderstood? In this video, I'll take you inside the Book of Enoch and explore the history of the most famous book that was banned from the Bible. Across world mythology, one race of monsters seems to appear again and again: the giants. Humanoid beings of immense size and brutality. The Norse of early Scandinavia spoke of beings called the Jotnar, primordial entities known for their cruelty and appetite for flesh. The most famous of these is Ymir, whose dismembered body was used to shape the forests, mountains, and fjords of the earth. In the myths of ancient Greece, we find the fearsome Gigantes, who failed to overthrow the gods alongside the Titans. One of these divine rebels was called Prometheus, a Titan who stole fire from Zeus and gifted it to humanity. His punishment? To be chained to a rock for eternity. Some of the earliest descriptions of giants come from the ancient Levant, where early Hebrew writers recorded myths of a cursed offspring between angel and man. They called them Nephilim, and it's these giants that will come to play a key role in the Book of Enoch. The origin of the Nephilim come from the Book of Genesis, chapter 6. It tells the early history of humankind and how they were corrupted by a group of beings known as the sons of God. And this is the original text. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. This passage in Genesis reveals the true origin of the Nephilim, a race of semi-divine beings born of a forbidden union between the human women and what appears to be angels. In the story, God is angered by humanity's corruption and decides to drown the world in a great flood. Aside from Noah and his family, the rest of humanity are washed away. Now, that should have been the end for the Nephilim, but strangely, they reappear after the biblical flood. This story comes from the Book of Numbers, during the time when Moses led the Hebrews through the desert as they journeyed to the Promised Land. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Enoch, who come from the Nephilim, and we seem to them like grasshoppers in their sight. If we take that literally and scale it up, the Nephilim would have been around the size of the Statue of Liberty. So by this account, the Nephilim truly are gigantic. Of course, it's possible that this is an exaggeration. Maybe a way to say they were simply strong warriors, rather than evidence that they were actual giants. Regardless, the Nephilim are some of the most unusual and debated beings in all of biblical lore. But for such interesting monsters, it's a shame that almost nothing else is said about them. But there are some hints if you know where to look. It's times like these when knowledge of biblical Hebrew comes handy. Well, I've got you covered. When you look at the word itself, Nephilim comes from the root word naphal, meaning fallen ones. Speaking of translation, some of the best answers we have come from an early Greek version of the Bible. The Septuagint translates the word Nephilim with the Greek word gigantes, which, as we've seen, means giants. All this is a good indication about how the Nephilim were understood back then. But I think we can one-up that. You see, around this time, other stories began to circulate, claiming to reveal the true origin of the Nephilim, and that was the Book of Enoch. Of all the characters to have their own banned biblical book, it's rather surprising that the hero of our story is, well, Enoch. You see, in the canonical Bible, Enoch is a very minor figure, mentioned only really in passing. Enoch appears once, listed in a very long family tree, but unlike the other names on this list, the Bible includes a very unusual detail. Thus, all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Aside from living to the ripe old age of 365, the text also reveals that Enoch walked with God. What could that mean? Ever since the earliest biblical interpretations, this line has caught people's attention, especially as the Nephilim story is directly afterwards. It was not long until people began putting the pieces together and wrote stories to expand on the mysteries left unanswered by the book of Genesis. The result is the book of Enoch, the story of what happened when Enoch walked with God. It claims to contain extra details about the events in the book of Genesis and the origin of the biblical Nephilim. What's more, it contained details so startling that it was banned from the biblical canon. In fact, it's a miracle that this text has even survived. You see, it was only relatively recently that the Book of Enoch was reintroduced to the West. In 1607, English explorer Sir Walter Raleigh was imprisoned in the Tower of London, awaiting trial for a plot against the king. To pass the time in jail, Raleigh embarked on writing an entire history of the world. Although this book was ultimately unfinished, Raleigh mentions a strange rumour he had heard that there was a lost text written by the biblical Enoch, which revealed, quote, the course of the stars, their names and motions. According to Raleigh, it was being kept safely in the land of Sheba, which today we know as Ethiopia. At the time, Raleigh's cryptic reference to the Book of Enoch went largely unnoticed, but that was until 1773, when a collection of ancient manuscripts were smuggled out of Ethiopia. Among them was a copy of what we now know as the Book of Enoch. You see, Ethiopia is home to some of the oldest Christian churches in the world, yet it's often left out of many Christian histories. In fact, some of the Bible's greatest treasures are said to be housed there. If the stories are to be believed, it may be the final resting place of the Ark of the Covenant. But that's a story of another video. Anyway, ever since its origins, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has regarded the Book of Enoch as canonical, and still does to this day. As scholars examined and translated these ancient manuscripts, some dating as far back as the 5th century AD, they soon realized that in their hands was the lost Book of Enoch, as described by Sir Walter Raleigh. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, with the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a cache of ancient manuscripts discovered in caves above the ruins of an ancient monastery. Preserved by the desert's heat and dryness, some of these texts included copies of the Book of Enoch. In fact, they were some of the oldest non-biblical texts ever discovered, and confirmed the theory that the Book of Enoch was indeed ancient. And here's what they found inside. The Book of Enoch, sometimes referred to as 1 Enoch, is a collection of at least 5 separate writings, stitched together into one larger work. These include the Book of Watchers, the Parables of Enoch, the Book of the Luminaries, the Book of Visions, and finally, the Letter of Enoch. Each of these 5 books were written at different times, from around the 3rd century BC all the way to the 1st century AD. Each section focuses on a different subject, from the Book of Visions, which contains strange apocalyptic dreams, to the Book of the Luminaries, which charts the movements of the sun, moon, and stars. But let's begin with the most dramatic of them all, which documents the fall of the angels and the rise of the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch opens with a warning to all who would dare to read it. A warning of an apocalypse. You see, in the distant future, God will emerge from heaven, and his angelic armies will descend upon the earth. Those who have embraced a life of sin will be cast into the fire. This is a pretty ominous opening, but Enoch tells us that such threats should not be taken lightly. After all, it would not be the first time that God has chosen to end all creation. The Book of Watchers is set near the start of the Book of Genesis, when the children of Adam and Eve began to spread across the face of the earth. Now, life was tough for these early people. You see, within a few days of even existing, Adam and Eve had already forfeited the Garden of Eden, and their son, Cain, had murdered his brother, Abel. It was not a great start, but things were about to get worse. A lot worse. Up in heaven lived a group of angels known as the Watchers. Although their duty was to guide humanity, they soon became, well, distracted. You see, as they watched over humanity, their gaze began to turn toward the human women. Drawn in by their beauty, a dark desire began to develop. And the Watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, "Come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget children for ourselves." Among the Watchers was a chieftain named Shemhazer, a powerful angel who led his fallen comrades down to earth, and from there committed a great sin against God. The human women soon fell pregnant and gave birth to a cursed offspring, the Nephilim, a race of savage, cruel giants who stood at the size of mountains. It was not long until they began to run rampant across the earth, and the giants began to kill men and to devour them. And they began to sin against the birds and beasts and creeping things and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh. With the rise of the Nephilim on earth, the Watchers had brought untold corruption against the natural order, and soon the earth itself cried out under their lawlessness. But the sin of the Watchers was not over. In fact, it was only just getting started. During the chaos and calamity wrought by Shemhazer and his followers, another Watcher, known as Azazel, began to take pity on the humans. Seeing their primitive ways, he revealed to them the many secrets of heaven. Azazel taught the humans the art of metallurgy, how to mine metals hidden in the earth and craft them into weapons of war. He also taught them how to shape gold into jewelry and crowns. Azazel taught humanity the art of civilization, and with it unlocked an insatiable appetite for knowledge. It was not long for the other Watchers to take notice, and they too began to reveal their secrets. Shemhazer taught enchantments and root cuttings. Barakel taught astrology, Kukabiel the constellations, Zikiel the knowledge of the clouds, Arakiel the signs of the earth, Shamsiel the signs of the sun, and Zariel the signs of the moon. Now, my favourite Watcher is the lesser known one called Hermione, who, and I'm not making this up, taught the humans the art of witchcraft and wizardry.
It's Leviosa.
Armed with this forbidden knowledge, the humans began to construct, create, and destroy. Warfare and violence spread across the land, and once again, the earth cried out in pain, and this time, heaven heard its call. Up in heaven, the remaining angels loyal to God looked down in despair. This included the four archangels, Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, and Sariel. Outraged by the chaos the Watchers had unleashed upon the world, they called out to God, asking why he did not do anything to stop them. You know all things before they happen, and you see these things, and you permit them. Seated upon his shining golden throne, God reveals that a plan has already been made. The only solution to deal with the Watchers is to wipe the world clean with a great flood. But there was one more thing left to be done. You see, there is one man on earth who is to be the final piece in fulfilling God's plan. Deep in the wilderness, far from the emerging civilizations of man, was a mystic and scribe named Enoch. He led a simple life of contemplation and prayer, and dwelt in the presence of God. But, as we shall see, he would get far more than he'd bargained for. It all happened in a flash. Enoch found himself taken up from the earth and into heaven. Before him was a terrifying sight. A throne bathed in flaming fire, shining like the golden majesty of the sun itself. Surrounding the throne were angels and other indescribable beings. Then a voice. "Come here, Enoch, and hear my words." It was God, and he had a message for Enoch. "Enoch, righteous scribe, go and say to the watchers of heaven, a great sentence has gone forth against you. You will have no relief or petition because of the unrighteous deeds that you have revealed." Enoch is tasked with delivering a message to the Watchers. As they have sinned against creation, they are about to be punished by the angels, and it is Enoch who is to announce their judgment. Suddenly, Enoch found himself back on Earth, under the cool night sky. There he meditates, illuminated by the light of young stars. The next section of the Book of Watchers follows Enoch's quest to find the fallen angels. The prophet journeys to all four corners of the earth, guided by the angels loyal to God. One of his companions, the angel Uriel, shows Enoch the workings of the cosmos, how the sun rises and sets, where the winds come from, and how the stars form the constellations. Uriel then leads Enoch to a vast and empty chasm. Below them, flames burn in the depths. It is a terrible sight, and a fear begins to grip Enoch. And Uriel notices, "Enoch, why are you so frightened and shaken? Because of this terrible place, and because of the fearful sight." And he said, "This place is a prison for the angels. Here they will be confined forever." Uriel reveals to Enoch that they are stood at the very entrance of hell itself. Although it is under construction, this prison will become the home of the fallen angels and all who follow in their ways. Enoch continues his journey and is soon met by the angel Gabriel. He takes him to a walled garden filled with the pleasant smell of cinnamon and sweet perfume. At the center of the garden stands a tree far greater than any other. This is the tree of wisdom, from which your father and mother of old ate and learned wisdom. Their eyes were opened, and they knew they were naked, and they were driven from the garden. Gabriel reveals to Enoch that they are standing beside the Garden of Eden, the earthly paradise and place of humanity's first sin. After many years of exploring the earth, Enoch finally nears the end of his quest, for he has found the Watchers. It was a terrible sight, though not for the reasons you would expect. You see, the Watchers were all curled up, afraid and trembling, unable to lift up their eyes out of shame. As Enoch read aloud their sentence, the Watchers pleaded God for mercy and forgiveness, begging Enoch to persuade God to withhold his judgment. In the spirit of fairness, or naivety, Enoch agrees to their request. He will make their case before God and see whether he will change his mind, and with that, he departs. That night, Enoch had a strange dream. In it, he was once again in heaven, standing before the throne of God, engulfed in fire. "Be not afraid, Enoch, righteous man and scribe of truth. Come here and hear my voice." God tells Enoch that the Watchers will receive no forgiveness. Their actions have brought devastation upon the earth, and because of them, God will send a great flood to rid humanity of their corruption, as well as eradicate the scourge of the Nephilim. But even after the flood, traces of corruption will remain in the hearts of man, remnants of the forbidden knowledge left behind by the Watchers, and, like a rot, it will once again spread. And so, God tells Enoch that in the distant future, there will be another judgment, an apocalypse, where God himself will intervene. And that is the Book of Watchers. As an opening to the Book of Enoch, you couldn't ask for anything better. From fallen angels to ferocious giants, it has everything, especially when it comes to the Nephilim. You see, where the canonical Bible mentions them only briefly, Enoch expands on their story, revealing how they were indeed giants and children of fallen angels, known as the Watchers. But there's more to it than just that. You see, the Book of Enoch also reveals that civilization itself is a gift from the fallen angels, who reveal to humanity the secrets of heaven. Now, something that you might also have noticed is that throughout the Book of Enoch so far, there is talk about an apocalypse, a final day of judgment in the future when the world will come to an end. These apocalyptic warnings dominate the Book of Enoch, with ideas that were largely absent from the other Old Testament texts. And that's no coincidence. You see, something very significant was happening around the time that Enoch was written, and it's here we turn to next. In 167 BC, the holy city of Jerusalem was at the center of a religious crisis. The Greek king, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, had desecrated the Jewish temple in the worst possible way. He had installed a pagan idol of Zeus inside the Temple of Israel, the sacred house of God. The desecration of the Jewish temple in 167 marked a turning point in centuries of Greek rule over the Jewish people. Dating back to the conquests of Alexander, the Jews experienced a period of relative tolerance, but soon they faced open aggression, especially under Antiochus IV. And according to the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, it was terrible. He compelled the Jews to dissolve the laws of their country, to keep their infants uncircumcised, and to sacrifice pig's flesh upon the altar, against which they all opposed, and the leaders among them were put to death. In these desperate times, many turned to their scriptures. However, these ancient biblical writings seemed to offer little comfort in this strange new world. Despite their obedience to the Jewish law, God's chosen still suffered, while their foreign overlords continued to prosper. This crisis of faith in the 2nd century BC reshaped the entire worldview of many Jews at the time. Evil was no longer seen as a human wrongdoing, but instead as an external cosmic force, an evil invader from the spiritual world. Soon, people began to imagine their world as being inhabited by evil spirits, and judging by the current political situation, it seemed that evil was winning. It was around this time when new stories began to emerge, texts that described visions where God himself would one day intervene and put an end to the corruption in a fiery cataclysm at the end of time. To describe this new genre of biblical writings, people began to use the word apocalypsis, a word borrowed from their Greek masters meaning to uncover. In fact, it's the root of the English word apocalypse. One of the most influential of these apocalyptic writings was the biblical book of Daniel, the story of how a prophet in Babylon survived under foreign kings and famously escaped the lion's den. But it is later in this very same book when Daniel receives a number of strange visions featuring animals that represent the earthly kingdoms, and also how a son of man will come to set the world right. At the time, the book of Daniel was so beloved that it was eventually included in the biblical canon, despite being one of the latest Old Testament texts. In fact, we know this because sections of this book were written in Aramaic, a later language that had begun to replace Hebrew in everyday speech during this time. But there were many other apocalyptic texts that did not make it into the Bible, and the most famous of these was the Book of Enoch. As we have seen, the Book of Enoch is deeply rooted in apocalyptic thought. It paints a world that was corrupted by supernatural beings and foretells a divine judgment where God will wipe away evil once and for all. Despite the Book of Enoch never making it into the biblical canon, it was enormously influential among certain Jewish groups of the time. This is evidenced by some of the oldest fragments of Enoch among the Dead Sea Scrolls that were likely used by an apocalyptic Jewish sect who withdrew to the desert to separate themselves from the evils of civilization. And while those Greek kingdoms eventually collapsed after a Jewish revolt, these apocalyptic beliefs would later resurface during the Roman annexation of Judea in 63 BC. You see, around the turn of the millennium, a certain carpenter from Nazareth began to speak of another judgment and a great renewal under the kingdom of God. But that's another story entirely. As for the Book of Enoch, its talk of apocalypses likely stem from its historical context, and knowing the world in which Enoch came from is essential to unlock this text. Among many biblical scholars, Enoch is considered to be one of the finest examples of Jewish apocalypticism that we have, even though it was ultimately excluded from the Bible. And with that, let's resume where we left off and explore the next chapter of the Book of Enoch. The Book of Parables is the second section of the Book of Enoch. Now, many scholars believe that it was originally written much later, likely by a different author. It contains strange visions of the future, in which God will raise up the righteous and punish the wicked. Listen, O ancients, the words of the Holy One, which I speak in the presence of the Lord of Spirits. During his travels, Enoch received many visions of the future, that one day there will be a final judgment. Although the precise time and place cannot be known, it will come when humanity is governed by corrupt rulers and powerful kings. The vision is centered around a chosen one who will come to save humanity. This figure is given the title Son of Man, and he will carry the wisdom and authority of heaven. According to this prophecy, he will rise on earth to confront the proud and expose the many injustices of the wicked. The faces of the mighty shall be cast down, and shame shall cover them. Afterwards, the angels shall measure paradise and prepare it for the faithful, those who lived according to God's commandments. In this new age, they will be taken away to live in paradise forever. The Book of Parables then ends with something rather cryptic. You see, the angels have a message for Enoch about the role that he is due to play. You are that Son of Man who was born for righteousness, and righteousness dwells upon you. In other words, it seems that Enoch is meant to be God's chosen one, the very Son of Man who appeared in his vision. But before we can learn anything more, the text comes to an abrupt close. The Book of Parables is your standard apocalyptic fare. The wicked are sent to hell and the righteous ascend to heaven, all tied up in a neat ribbon of fire and brimstone. The text focuses heavily on a mysterious figure called the Son of Man, who remains the central mystery of this book. Although this term appears in the book of Daniel, it seems that the book of Enoch is the first to present the Son of Man as some sort of divine figure. And Enoch won't be the last to do this. Just read the Gospel of Mark, chapter 13, which uses strikingly similar language. Let's continue our journey through the book of Enoch, which takes a turn to the stars. As we know from the canonical book of Genesis, Enoch lived a long life, 365 years to be exact. Now, to pass the time, he probably needed a hobby, and it looks like he might have found one. The Book of the Luminaries is all about astronomy, the movements of celestial bodies like the sun, moon, and stars. The text reads like an ancient stargazing manual that was revealed to Enoch by the angel Uriel. It contains precise descriptions of the stars and other heavenly bodies. With this data, Enoch lays out how these cycles can be organized into charts to keep the time, or to you and me, a calendar. The key part of this book is its description of a solar calendar, one that follows the movements of the sun. In fact, Enoch's calendar is rather similar to the one we use today. It describes a year as a period of 364 days, divided into 4 distinct seasons of 91 days each. In many ways, it's surprisingly familiar, although there's one problem. A true solar year is 365 days and a quarter. If this difference isn't properly accounted for, the seasons would gradually shift. To correct this, the Book of Enoch adds an extra day periodically, similar to the leap year in our modern calendar. The Book of the Luminaries is a bit of an odd one out when it comes to the Book of Enoch. After all, what does astronomy have to do with any of this? Consider Enoch's age, 365 years. It just so happens to be the length of a solar year, and that detail must have intrigued people even back then. And yes, according to the Bible, people had massive lifespans, including Enoch, although that's nothing when compared to his son, Methuselah, who reached the age of 969 years old. Just shy of a millennium, Methuselah is the oldest character in the Bible. Well, except for God, of course. In fact, to honor his age, one of the oldest stars in the universe, HD 140283, has been dubbed the Methuselah star. It's estimated to be around 12 billion years old and acts as a window into the dawn of the universe itself. It's another curious link to Enoch and astronomy. One thing that the Book of the Luminaries reveals to us is that back then, science and religion were one and the same. In the Book of Enoch, movements of the celestial bodies were used to predict the fates and fortunes for the people on Earth. We actually see this throughout world mythology. One famous example is the orbit of the planet Venus, one of the brightest objects in the night sky. Often visible just before dawn, the morning star appears to travel downwards towards the Earth, just like an angel falling from the sky. In fact, the Romans called this star Lightbringer or Lucifer. Diabolical coincidences aside, let's explore the 4th section of the Book of Enoch, and quite possibly the strangest one of them all. As we've seen, the Book of Enoch is rooted in its historical context, a time when Judea was under the rule of the Hellenistic kings. But this was nothing new. Throughout the Old Testament, Israel passes from the hands of many foreign rulers, from the Egyptians, Babylonians, Persians, and eventually to the Greeks. And it's here where the Book of Visions comes in. It effectively retells the history of Israel, from the days of Enoch and the flood, all the way up to the period of its composition. For some, history can be a little dry, but the Book of Enoch has an answer for that. In its version of history, every nation is represented by a different animal. This has led to a rather brilliant name among scholars: the animal apocalypse. It all starts with 2 cows living happily in a field. These cows represent humanity in its purest state. However, as the herd grows, their peaceful life is suddenly disturbed when the stars themselves fall down to Earth and begin to breed with the cows. Those stars represent the Watchers, those fallen angels from before. Meanwhile, God looks down at his zoo tycoon experiment gone wrong and decides to reset it with a great flood. Anyway, the rest of the dream vision follows the history of Israel, represented by a flock of sheep. The flock survives attacks from bears, lions, hyenas, ravens, and eagles, each representing different nations that ruled over the land at various points in history. One day, the traumatized sheep are suddenly rescued by God, and all their enemies are cast into the fire. Then, among them, a mighty leader is raised up, a glorious white bull who rules over the flock. As the vision draws to a close, the whole world are suddenly transformed back into cows. If you've ever read Animal Farm by George Orwell, you'll know that it uses pigs to describe the rise of communism. Well, Enoch's Book of Visions works in a similar way. It retells the biblical apocalypse with sheep. These strange symbols and analogies were actually quite common in these ancient apocalyptic texts. Similar visions can be found in the Book of Daniel, which describes 4 beasts rising from the sea, each representing a different nation. Animal symbols like these worked as a kind of code for readers. Those who knew what the animals represented could grasp the hidden meaning and unlock the political message underneath. These animal descriptions continued well into the Christian period. If you're familiar with the Book of Revelation or have watched my video, you'll know that it too is filled with bizarre creatures believed to represent the Roman Empire. Speaking of end times, we now approach the final section of the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch closes with a letter from Enoch to his followers. Throughout his long life, God has revealed to him untold mysteries and horrors of the universe, and Enoch wants to pass on his final thoughts to those who have made it this far. But many of them are warnings. Woe to you, O rich, for in your riches you have trusted. From your riches you will depart, because you have not remembered the Most High in the days of your riches. In the style of an ancient prophet, Enoch condemns the sins of the world, greed, corruption, and the oppression of the poor. But amid the warnings, there is a message for the faithful. Though the people might suffer now, Enoch promises a great reversal. Those who built their riches on cruelty will be brought low, and the humble will be raised up. Exactly when and what time, no one knows. And with that, the Book of Enoch comes to an end. Over the course of more than 100 chapters, we now know exactly what happened when Enoch walked with God. From such a small line in the Old Testament, the writers of Enoch have crafted a sprawling epic from apocalyptic parables and visions of cosmic judgment. For lovers of mythology, it has everything you could ask for, especially when it comes to the mysterious Nephilim and their origin. But where I find this book especially interesting is its links to the real-life politics of ancient Judea, and how the oppression of foreign rulers gave rise to apocalyptic thinking, with its tales of evil kings and mighty rulers being humbled before the throne of God. But there's one final question about the Book of Enoch. If this text was so influential and widely read, then what happened to it? Why did the Book of Enoch not make it into the Bible? As we've seen, the Book of Enoch and the broader rise of apocalyptic texts represent a style of Jewish thought in the centuries before the time of Jesus. While writings like the Book of Daniel eventually made it into the Bible, the Book of Enoch did not. There are many reasons for this, and one of them is fairly straightforward. You see, the Book of Enoch's contents are simply extreme. The idea of fallen angels simply wouldn't have complemented the established body of Jewish literature at the time. The texts that would eventually develop into the Bible's Old Testament were more concerned with matters surrounding the Jewish law. And then there's the question of authorship. Although this book was supposedly written by the biblical Enoch, the fact that it was a relative latecomer led many to question its authenticity. While the Book of Enoch may not have been mainstream, it's important to remember that ancient Judaism was very diverse. In the centuries before Jesus, different religious groups held very different views, and so these apocalyptic writings, like Enoch, circulated at the fringes of society. Now, how the Book of Enoch was received in ancient Judaism is one thing. What about the Book of Enoch and Christianity? Here's where things get interesting. You see, some of the earliest Christian texts have echoes to Enoch. In the New Testament epistle of Jude, the book of Enoch is even quoted. This suggests that the author not only knew of Enoch, but understood it as authoritative. Many of Enoch's ideas seemed to be well placed within these early Christian communities. As far as we can tell, the early Christians believed that Jesus would return in their lifetime, and with him, a day of judgment would come. As Christianity began to expand, it moved away from its original setting in Judea, and with it began to evolve into something different. Guided by figures like Athanasius and Augustine, the followers of Jesus began to focus less on things like the apocalypse and more on questions like the status and nature of Jesus. And with it, it seems that the Book of Enoch was gradually left out of the Christian canon. But there were those who held on to the Book of Enoch. Those outside the sphere of Western Christianity, far to the south, in the African nation of Ethiopia, the Book of Enoch was, and still is, regarded as canonical, and we have these churches to thank for preserving this remarkable piece of apocryphal biblical writing. The Book of Enoch has left an imprint on Christian culture as we know it. Many say that the Book of Enoch popularized the myth of the fallen angel, an idea that first appears in this ancient text. This strange, wonderful, and curious book belongs to an extended universe of banned biblical literature. But of course, Enoch is one of many and is far from the most controversial. That title goes to the Gnostic Gospels, a series of Christian texts that claim to reveal the forbidden teachings of Jesus, including the Gospel of Judas.